Good evening, Collington. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight or for being here live. My name is Tonya Burton, and I am one of the artists in residence. So tonight is the final recital of my three-part series of Solo Bach and Solo Reger, where I've been pairing each of the three solo suites by Max Reger with one of the solo suites for cello by Bach. So tonight you'll be hearing Reger Suite number 3 in E minor and Bach Cello Suite number 3 in C major. Since this is my final recital of this series, I thought it would be fun to reflect a bit on my experience with this music and with these two different composers. So this was my first time performing the three Reger suites, which was very exciting and a bit challenging. And then I also enjoyed revisiting the three Bach cello suites, which I have performed in the past. And I realize that many of you are probably familiar with some of the suites already. In the short time that I've been at Collington, we've broadcasted performances of the suites by Dr. Coots, by fellow students Chi Lee, Emily DeVela, and the bassist Paul Nemeth. As this indicates, solo Bach is a huge part of the string player's diet. We are working on it constantly. We work on it when we're little. It's in some of the Suzuki books, so we might be way too young to play Bach, but we're playing it. And we work on it throughout our whole careers, because it's on most major audition lists. Because we're working on so much solo Bach, it's really easy to not appreciate the music that we're playing, especially when we're preparing it for auditions. And I can say, in my experience, sometimes I associate Bach with rigidity and maybe a dryness or a predictability. I would be lying to say if I didn't listen to Bach sometimes and think, oh, was that boring, or was I zoning out a little bit? But I can assure you that these associations are very counterproductive to the intention of the music. And I will do my best to not bore you today. Fingers crossed. So one of the most striking differences between Bach and Reger's music is actually just looking at the page, the amount of markings on the music. So Reger's suite has a lot of expressive markings with dynamics and timings and articulations. But for Bach, there are very, very few markings. And that isn't because Bach wasn't as creative as Reger, but actually is just reflective of the time period. So during the Baroque time, musicians were expected to improvise and embellish and ornament the notes on the page. So they would be spontaneously decorating the notes with their own notes. And I think that's far from rigid or boring. For myself personally, and you can ask Saniva, probably she has the same experience as well. But for classically trained musicians, we're trained to do exactly what's on the page. So for Reger, we see the markings and we'll do them, and the music will sound exciting because of that. But when we get to Bach, we also do just that, and there's nothing on the page. So that's why we often hear dry performances, because people aren't adding the expectations of the time, those embellishments or that freedom. So it has been enjoyable for me to revisit these suites and try to bring this music more life, which is a little hard when you have old habits. So I've been trying to kick those habits for you. So in order to bring the music to life, I have to look beyond what's on the page. And there's a lot that is implied in the music of what the Baroque performers would be looking for. So the main part of this outline, sometimes I think of Bach's music as really an outline, and I get to kind of fill it in and tell my own story and create my own colors and decide what everyone gets to hear. So the main part of this outline is the harmonic structure. So Bach, he starts in one key, so in this case, C major, and then he'll take us through all these other keys. And that's what creates all the drama. And then he again comes back to C major, and we can finally end the piece. And during that drama, the performers would be expected to mark the cadences or take some time in specific places. As an example, I will play the opening of the prelude. And the prelude is just, almost the whole prelude is a string of fast 16th notes. So if I didn't take time, just imagine that being just a run-on sentence of continuous notes. But I will play an example where hopefully I will take time and try to make things special. And you can just, kind of experience the harmonies as I go. So you might have noticed that things were very unequal when I was playing. And you'll also probably notice when I do perform the work for you, it will sound different. Because every time we play this music, you can change, you know? It's very spontaneous. There's also another thing that the Baroque performers would be on the lookout for are periods. So this music, during this time period, they were often imitating rhetoric. So they would write music in periods, like sentences. And it's really fun once you start looking for those periods, you can kind of create a conversation by yourself. And as a performer, I get to decide what that conversation is. Is someone, asking a question? Is someone responding affirmative or declining? So I will play the opening of the Bores. And you'll hear there's a statement and then a response. So you can listen for those conversations during the music. Another key to understanding and bringing life to this roadmap is understanding the dances. So this suite consists of a prelude followed by 5 dance movements. And just knowing that it's a dance, you have a lot more information. So although the music is not marked, there's no accents or tenutos or emphasis on the page, because it's a dance, we know to emphasize some beats and not emphasize others. So I'll play the opening of the courant, and hopefully you'll get a sense of the dance. It's in a quick 3. So once we've established that feeling of the emphasis of the beat, we can also mess around with it. So as I mentioned, this was in 3, like a 3/4 measure, but sometimes Bach writes the music as if it's in 6/8. So in this example, you'll first kind of start maybe being able to tap your foot to that 3/4, but then every once in a while, it might feel a bit jagged because he throws in some 6/8. Okay, so as you can tell just because there's not much on the page. There's a lot within the notes to bring out. And I think that's why we can hear so many different kinds of performances, and not one of them is the same. Another aspect that I've been reminding myself a lot when I play Bach is that Bach was writing these suites when the cello was relatively new. So there was just a fascination with instruments at this time. And I like to imagine Bach he was a great improviser at the keyboard. He would just sit down and write, he could just play fugues or whatever he wanted. And I imagine him just picking up the cello and messing around and writing down this music. And because he's kind of figuring out the instrument, the suites get progressively more difficult. So by the time we get to the third suite, I think the music starts to sounds like it can stand alone more. Each movement is very distinct, and he starts to use more complex techniques of the instrument. So one of these instrumental complexities that he uses is called variolage. And this word refers to a technique of crossing the strings on your instrument. More recently I learned it actually means multicolored. So they would mess around with the different strings to create more colors. So there's a really lengthy section of variolage in the prelude. I'll play you just a bit of that. And then he uses this technique, but in different ways throughout the suite. So I'll play a bit of the G, which also has a very lengthy variolage section. So it just adds a bunch of resonance in different colors. So going hand in hand with this idea of exploring the instrument, this time period was also interested in how the instrument affected the humans. So it affected their emotions, their body, and their spirit. And this is the idea of affect, which I've talked about in the previous lectures. And I think you feel that very strongly in Bach. There's always kind of an emotional pull. And I think it's this combination of a higher purpose with emotional intent, with the spontaneity of the music, and also being a bit challenging to play that makes these suites kind of a holy grail for string players. But I will leave you with this. While the suites are currently held in such high esteem, this was not always the case. For most of their existence, they actually lay in obscurity. So most people had no idea they existed except for a handful of Bach scholars. And they just thought this music was technical studies or etudes. It wasn't until a young Pablo Casals, a famous Catalonian cellist, he stumbled across them at a random bookstore in Barcelona. And when he found them, he found meaning and purpose in the music. And he presented them to the public in the early 1900s, and they just caught like fire. And now, they're really a pillar in our repertoire. As a performer, it's very humbling to hear this story and realize the potential that we have to bring music to life. So while I am no Casals, I definitely aspire to have that kind of and just have that sense of purpose in my playing. So I've loved working on these, and I hope you enjoy Bach Cello Suite No. 3. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry for those of you listening on your TVs. I heard that the sound was not loud enough, so hopefully the problem is solved. Okay, so next you'll be hearing the third and final Reger suite. As I mentioned, it's been really fun, but also a bit challenging working on these suites. Unlike the Bach, I have never performed the Reger before, so this music was new to me, and I'm assuming it was new to you as well. So if you tune into my previous recitals, then you know that Reger was greatly influenced by Bach and his music. Although Reger wrote his suites in 1915, he was constantly looking back, using classical and Baroque traditions. I think it's safe to say that Reger did have the Bach cello suites and the violin solo sonatas and partitas in his mind when he wrote his own suites. Although they sound very different, and they're very different to play. So as I mentioned earlier, Bach was writing his suites when the cello was new. But by the time we get to Reger in the 19th and 20th century, the instruments were not so new anymore. And the instruments and the bows had developed to maximize sound, so they had changed a bit. But the overall instrumental technique was much, much higher. So the musicians were expected to play higher in register, to play double stops, where you play two notes simultaneously, and had a lot of different bow techniques. So you'll hear that this music by Reger is much more virtuosic. And actually the slow movement, the third movement, is almost entirely double stops. So it'll sound like two instruments playing at once. So while Reger is not exploring the instrument in the same way that Bach was, he was exploring and testing the expressive capabilities of the instrument, and certainly test my own capabilities. So with that in mind, when I'm playing Reger's music, I tend to approach my instrument very differently than Bach. It requires a lot more command, and oftentimes I kind of will my desire onto the instrument, especially in this romantic, kind of indulgent style. So Reger does indicate a lot of expressive things in the music. You remember that his music is more marked up than Bach, notating the specific dynamics he wants, articulations, and the timings. But while the markings are different, and I approach my instrument differently, there is a lot of similarities. So as I mentioned, with Bach, I was trying to show the harmonic structure. Reger is exactly the same, and he himself will dictate how he wants me to bring out the structure, but it has that same idea. Another thing that you'll hear that is similar is that are those kind of conversational dialogues. So back in the Bures, where I decided how the dialogue went, Reger dictates. So I'll play the opening of the vivace, the second movement, and you'll hear there are two voices, and I'm forced to play one loud and one soft. So you'll hear these kind of really small conversations going on. So with all of these markings, it may seem a bit restrictive, right? I have to do what Reger asked. But the beauty of performance is that I still get to make it my own. Just it takes a little bit more thought and intention. And fortunately, no composer can dictate everything, although many really do try. A lot of modern composers go way beyond what's expected with the notation. But there's so much that our instruments can do that can't be notated fully. And so it's fun to kind of explore different sounds and different possibilities. So exploring these suites have been really fun for me, definitely a challenge, but I think it's made me become a bit more creative, and hopefully I can express my voice through Reger's music. So I hope you enjoy. This is Reger's Suite Number 3 in E minor. Should I switch mics? Should I switch the mics?
Why don't you leave it on?
This one on?